For those of you who don't know, my mom is a diehard Jehovah's Witness, all right? And nobody can shake her from that. She's going to she great with that, right? And one day, my dad, who had really down in Port Command, he used to drop us to the Foros Kingdom Hall. And then he would go down to Port Command with his popo and salo and them and, hang out. Come back and pick us up. So one day he picked us up one Sunday, and he took us straight to Sea Lots. And he took us down to the end of Sea Lots and made us see how some children live. And that had, for some reason, that had a serious impact on me because I got to understand that my dad was deeply rooted in the grassroots. You know, he wasn't this person that tried to climb any status climb or, as I say in the US, brown nose or whatever. So we are products of our environments. And I think that sometimes we fail to understand what it really means to give back. And that's what we had, that's what I got from my grandmother. Those old stories and those of morals. And that's what makes civilizations and peoples survive. You know? I've been doing this for some time, and one of the things that I recognize that they did to marginalize George Goddard, may he rise in peace. I do say rest. He's right. One of the things that they did to George Goddard was marginalizing because of his educational status. You see, George Goddard was just a post-primary educated young man, an orphan at 15, mother being dead at 15 as their father died at 9 years old. And yes, I don't know what about him, no family life, no education, what made this man, this principle, some act of God for those of us who choose to believe in God. And so that's what they used, and that's what I saw. So when
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is George David Goddard, and I'm the eldest son of the steel band movement icon, George Sonny Goddard. I just wanted to reach out to you guys quickly to clarify a few things about who I am and what my efforts have been, especially since I graduated from Florida Memorial University in 2008. When I graduated, I really wanted to do two things. I had intended to move on and do my master's in the field of psychology 1. And I also wanted to be able to immediately apply what I learned in college back to what we will call the steel pan or steel drum industry, right? Of course, in the field of psychology, because I wanted to do psychology, I actually did double the amount of requirements for my minor, because psychology is my minor, and the requirements were 18 credits. I did something like almost 36, I think actually 34 credits in the field of psychology, including research methods, developmental psychology, and numerous other courses, of course the intro courses and so on. And of course I had practicums to complete and so forth. But one of the courses that I did in psychology was a specialized field in psychology called Black Psychology, or the Psychology of Blacks. And this was basically a field that was created by Dr. Parham White. And in that class, the instructor was a African American professor by the name of Dr. Monique Earl Lewis. I think she's at Morehouse now, if I'm not mistaken. But she introduced me to a text. One of the required texts in that course was Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And reading that book, it kind of opened my eyes in terms of roles the two main roles that exist in society, especially in a capitalist society, and that is oppressor and oppressed. So you have two sides, oppressor, oppressed, and I was clear on that. And one of the concepts that Paulo Freire referred to in terms of education was the banking system of education. And when I got exposed to that, I really didn't want to become part of that status quo. I didn't want to become, what my dad would have referred to as an educated jackass. I felt that I entered college not as a donkey, but as a horse, and I wanted to leave as such. So that being said, when I left college in 2008, and somewhere around that, shortly after that, got I observed that there was a site called When Steel Talks. So I jumped on When Steel Talks, and of course, trying to rekindle my dad's efforts in the steel band movement. The very first thing I observed when I entered When Steel Talks was that George Sonny Goddard wasn't even a discussion. His name was not mentioned. Nothing about him was even discussed, and majority of the discussion was really distracting, tangential conversations that had absolutely nothing to do with the steel band movement. So it made me realize that the challenge was that most people, one, didn't even have a connection with the past, the steel, of the the history of the steel bands, and secondly, they couldn't even articulate or properly define the steel band movement. So, influenced by Paulo Freire, and of course, well, to backstep a little bit, probably in my DNA, my grandfather being the Wilton Rogers, one of the educators in Trinidad and Tobago who formed the People's Education Movement that became the People's National Movement. He was the head, the Minister of Education during it when the People's National Movement gained independence. Won independence for Trinidad and Tobago. So my grandfather is a founder of the People's National Movement, and he was a lecturer at the Teachers Training College and taught, among other people, Dr. Hollis Liverpool, who actually got the sobriquet chalk dust from the title of some written works that my grandfather coined. Now, so that's where I was coming from, and with those type of influences and that in my DNA, one of the things efforts I tried to do on When Steel Talks was to try to form a book club. And then I started presenting, one of the other challenges I recognized was the erasure of the African origins of the steel band as a quote-unquote culture. And, of course, just like the Black Lives Matter, some people will try to push back and say all lives matter. And those like us who say Black Lives Matter, not saying that all lives does not matter. But again, if all lives matter, then Black lives should matter. And if Black lives matter, then Black inventions should matter. Just like Black foods matter. Just recently I was checking on the internet and they were highlighting the top 25 foods from Trinidad and Tobago, and the top 4 were East Indian dishes. Okay? No one argues or complains, no one is offended when I say roti is an East Indian dish, although we know we might change up the things, the way it's made, right? Most of these words, dal and all of the Hindu influences, Hindu words, right? And we can understand the difference between indentured labor and chattel slavery and the contractual arrangements that existed or lack thereof in the case of slavery, where you were just basically an animal, and indentured servant was basically just that, a servant paid, and they were paid for their passage back home or offered land to stay in Trinidad and Tobago. All right? History. Those who forget their history condemn to repeat it. All right? So this is where I was coming from. Of course, there was a certain East Indian guy by the name of Sid on When Steel Talks. Immediately, got offended for me asserting the African origins, and also for me asserting that my dad was, in my opinion, the greatest leader of the steel band movement. Of course, understanding that they think the steel band movement is like a movement that like one of Beethoven's, some musical movement. The steel band movement is not a musical movement. In fact, if you go to my father's interview with Von Martin, you will see clearly that music wasn't even that. The music was supplied by the vocalists, by vocals, the people singing certain chant, well, whoever it is, right? And what was known as a steel band back then was really just ripple supply and rhythm playing tin pans are accompanied by bottle and spoon and thing, which again, those origins come from, I think, Ghana, Africa. These are all African origins. You see it, and even in South Florida here, you see it in Cuban culture. Right? So, because I come on and I speak certain truths, some of which may be inconvenient to certain people who may have certain prejudices, right? I had to declare my position in terms of all isms, including racism, and I wouldn't get into my personal history, but anybody who knows me knows that I am not for any ism, right? And but at the same time, we have to be equal and we have to be shared. So I try to look at it from all sides. For example, when a white American steel pan player came to me and said that he felt offended because at a certain gig they asked him to put on a tam with fake dreads, he felt offended. I spoke out and up for him. When a famous Chinese Trinidadian steel pan player who used to play in Phase 2 came and told me that how he got rejected for a gig or some words to the effect because he was not quote-unquote authentic enough. I spoke out for him. But at the same time, I was speaking out against the corruption. When I was learning about the BMW X5 and the Cayenne, and the piece of land that was attached to some guy who was knighted by Prince Charles or whatever in England, right? Send out threats to me and all kinds of things because there's, it's gangster running things in Pan now. I get threats from Kid Diaz, okay? A white steel pan colleague, who I thought was a colleague because I realized I have no friends now, okay? And he came to me and one day by text, I guess, or message, and asked me, well, what do I think Pan needs to move forward? And that's how the blueprint was created. I created a blueprint, which I admitted was a rough draft. I'm not no PhD holder. I just consider me having the same type of education, or my father, I consider even having a greater education than me, even though I have 2 letters after my name and he didn't. But I always remember again his story of the educated donkey when it returns from college, not being a gelding, was steed. So this is where I was coming from. Got immediately fighting down, and even people admitting that at the town hall meeting, which I'm getting to now, right? Because the other thing that they were doing, they were trying to pin me as though I had quote-unquote daddy issues, and I was about all talk, like they were, forgetting that right now, currently, there are over 17,000 people on Wednesday Talks, and one person dominates the conversation. And that person seeped over from Trinidad Guardian online, where he was a famous troll, spewing out a whole bunch of racist tropes, offended people. Even on Wednesday Talks, a black sister was almost in the brink of tears and was allowed to continue and dominate till it reached to the point that they might as well call the site When Claude Talks. Everybody better listen. So I understand the oppressor oppressed, and I understand that they call me all kind of thing except a child of God. But I also, like Bob Marley said, I'll never forget no way they crucified Jesus Christ, sold Marcus Garvey for rice, and turned their backs on Paul Bogle. So me, George David Goddard, George Sonny Goddard's son, who I call the Malcolm X of the steel band movement, the godfather of the steel band movement, I will never forget who I am, nor where I stand in the struggle. I speak to an international audience, and I speak to posterity. So just like Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa may not have been worth anything when he made it, and what it's worth today, I trust that my words, just like my father works, and my works, just like my father works, will be some of the most valuable contributions to our subculture called steel band in Trinidad and Tobago. So when they were thinking I was just like all talk like how I talk, and because I can talk, daddy, Odie was self-educated, post-primary education. Very few could have, articulated their thoughts like he could, or I could. And so they challenged me and say, well, Odie talk. So I said, okay, let's take it further than talk. Let's remove the conversation and the discussions off of social media. And let's go down to Trinidad and Tobago, which I consider ground zero. And let's continue the discussion there. And let's call it the Wednesday Talks Town Hall Meeting. Shortly thereafter, I received notice from Pantimes and them, or whoever running things at Wednesday Talks, notifying me, thanks but no thanks. They don't want their name, for whatever reason, attached to the Town Hall Meeting, or attached to Pantam, the Ghost Who Talks. No problem. Because I always knew, even before I heard the cliche that they used from the great Lewis, the great congressman, I always knew that, just like my dad, I was always willing to get into good trouble and decent trouble, especially when it is necessary trouble. And that's what I did. So in 2014, in the midst of me planning out the town hall meetings, Sid is in the meantime sending me all kind of notices that as soon as I arrived, the immigration authorities, which when I reached down there, I realized there was a whole bunch of, again, more looking like him than looking like me. Put one and one together, and if you come up with three, then so be it. My math may be wrong. Right? Threats, immigration, go hold me, police, all kind of thing, for what? For having a revolutionary mind and for standing and speaking up for the side of the oppressed and not feeling that my education entitled me to assimilate over into the oppressor side and think that I have made it and think that is freedom, because that's what Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed warned us all about. That is not freedom, that is not liberation. We're not going to find freedom or liberation in the steel band movement or any movement in Trinidad and Tobago society unless we free everyone, unless we dismantle the system. The relationship has to remove itself. So when we remove that relationship, that environment, oppressor environment, then everybody will be free, including the oppressor. Right? That is my framework. That is what I see as being true freedom. That's why, again, like I don't believe in isms. Right? So in the blueprint, for example, I'm probably the only personality, the only company, Panicle USA, or anything that I represent, that have a discrimination clause. So I talk about LGBTQ rights, transsexual rights. I asked if the gay desperados could reclaim the name gay, even if they won't, whether they were homosexual, lesbian, or transvestite, or what. Are we all inclusive? Or are we exclusive bunch? Is it a big five, or is it all? All of us go moving together. Together we aspire, together we achieve, living up to those ideals. So this is where I was coming from. Had the town hall meeting, went down in Trinidad and Tobago on my funds, and the week before I reached down in Trinidad and Tobago, I got a call, an email I think it was, from a major insurance company in South Florida offering me a really nice position as an investigator for their SIU department. But I already made a commitment to my people in Trinidad and Tobago, so I had to turn it down, and I went down in Trinidad and Tobago and had the town hall meeting. So before we had the town hall meeting, we had met and met with the pioneers in Casablanca and represented them because again, it's about balancing tradition and technology, right? I met with a whole bunch of people. When I go down to I meet with the EPAN people, I meet with the people up in Phi, Copeland people and them, Brian I think was the guy's name on one of my visits. So, you know, we met at Casablanca, and then represented the company and told them what we were about. Excuse me, my ring just hit my pan. And so, seeking for a little help, right? And we decided, well, okay, we can go to the Trinidad and Tobago government, thinking this was in Trinidad's interest, right? To at least help us recoup some of the funds. If nothing wasn't, everything was done out of our pockets. All the equipment, cordless mics, I took down my expensive wireless Sennheiser mics, and Emil Board took his expensive Shaw mics, and he has a PA set system that he leaves down in Trinidad and Tobago for such type of things. So we were able to make it happen. Thankfully, Gerald Clark was gracious enough to allow us to use Starlift Panyard, and that's how we were able to pull that one off. But when we were in the permanent secretary, Roger Israel's office, I think it's Tatel Buildings upstairs somewhere, really nice office, and I'm looking outside. He told, because we're seeking funds from the government, he told us, well, he has to get the okay from the big boss, the chief, right? Chief Keith Diaz, famous from the audit that was published in 2018. So you also check out the audit of all they claim, all they love in pan, all they love pan, all they don't love pan. My father did love pan. Check out his history, and you see who then compare to people, including those members from the Diaz administration. Go and look at the audit and see what they got for what they think. You have an education officer who can't even spell partner, spelling it panda. And when he approached me, the name Goddard never even ring a bell to this quote-unquote education officer, and he have the audacity to admit to me that the reason why he doesn't know anything about the history of pan is because, and I'm paraphrasing him, Diaz literally pulled him off the street a day. I think I could have been south if I was mistaken, that he told me. Saw him a day and asked him, what you doing, boy? Boy, come and get a job. Pull him in the office, but I guess that's the way his quote-unquote wash money sometimes, because you understand the gangster thing. I live in South Florida, so trust me. If all you feel all you know gangster thing, Miami nice, Miami vice. Enough said on that. Yardman, Haitian, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Trini. Okay? Or they only have one kind of, well, maybe now you have some more Venezuelan, and you understand? Excuse me. I have to go up the twang a little bit because it's really ridiculous. All right? So, while we're there in the permanent secretary office, I could just over here, and Emil Board and my brother there, Shabbos there with me, Gerard Goddard. And we hearing Diaz cussing loud. Them Goddard boys! Don't get them effing Goddard boys nothing! If he could only come through that phone, I feel that just deal with me right there. Because he's a bad man. Or at least, the Godfathers and them must move. Send out a threat subsequently after that, directly to my brother, same brother who was in the office that day, in the permanent secretary office, telling my brother that he could, basically paraphrasing again, take me out whenever he's ready. But you see, again, I never forget no way they crucified Jesus Christ. And son only just come out all the and I know big, by the way, I know big Christian. Only see the big nada that I had. I have, right? As all they like to call it, all the timers now. But I know why I wear the crown. And I know the same way I wear the covenant is the same way. All they will crown me with thorns the same way. Because guess what? I just flesh and blood, See, if all they could crown all your own God with thorns, why I could expect all you go do to me and my father legacy, or what you did to him when he was alive. All they give all kind of people honorary degree and all kind of thing and this and that. Right? Clifford Alexis, who I met. May he also reside in peace. But they could have done a lot more to highlight what my father did for them. Because I met Clifford Alexis in January of 1986, months after I immigrated to the United States. Staying by Hugh Board one day. I come up from Hugh Board's basement and enter their garage. So while I enter the garage, Hugh Board is there and Clifford Alexis is tuning Trinidad Tripoli steel band pans. So Hugh Board, we call Boboy. So Boboy look at Mr. Alexis and say, basically, Cliffy, you know who's this? This Goddard's son, you know. So that time, Mr. Alexis look at me now and say, you is David? He say, you don't know your father. He say, I know you since you was a baby, you don't know your father. He said, let me tell you what your father do. And then he went on and tell me how on the last night of their tour, they were able to, he called them in a room, or they were in a room, or hotel, or whatever he called them, I know, right? And basically handed each one of them their passports back, telling them, boy, it have nothing to offer pan men, or steel bandsmen, or whatever it is he might have used. In Trinidad and Tobago, see what all they could do up here in the United States. So, again, paraphrasing, I wasn't there, I wasn't the fly in the wall. But I got that from the horse's mouth, from Clifford Alexis. And if I lie, may I die like him right immediately, right now. And I'm willing to take any lie detector test. You give people, all kind of people honorary degrees. Wait not for George Sonny Goddard, forming the National Steel Band. Clifford Alexis would have never have been left to come to America. Okay? I'm not sure even if he could have afforded it. Okay? Back then. These guys forgot where they come from. Kid Diaz forgot who built the house that he desecrated. You all talk about anger. You all put yourselves in my position. You all know the nights. From the time I was born, I was weeks old, I was affected. I wouldn't go into that private story. I was affected from days old I was born. My family life was disrupted because my father was involved in the steel bands. Always quick to judge people. Call me anything. But you know what? Call me. Because I will show up, especially for the downtrodden and the oppressed and the underprivileged. There are things I'm doing right now that you all have no inclination or clue of what I'm doing for others. Because what I do is what I do. And I do what I could do. And if it's I alone have to push the vehicle, I will push it. And if I have to step aside and watch you all keep pushing push the car in the ditch and keep the wheels spinning in mud and not going anywhere, I walked away from this thing 7 years ago after the town hall meeting, which was in 2014. I didn't even show up. And I just recently show up again just because it was shortly before my father's birthday and I had an agenda. And look what it took, me getting into decent trouble, shouting on when Steel talks. But I was still putting out certain things, but I understood that at this time I was a nobody. There's a new king in town that they're looking to crown from South. Pretty boy Floyd. Handpicked from Kid Diaz. You understand? So the cabal could continue and the money could wash. Because the first thing Beverly Ramsey Moore, who again, that's another story, but we'll get into that in another time. You know, because I have a blogs and thing, you know, my truth's gonna come out, you know. I represent Beverly Ramsey Moore. Write letter to Northern Illinois University and get in all kind of trouble because they start crying to me, Bertel Gittins and all of them. Snakes. You hear what I say? S-N-A-K-E-S. I didn't stutter. Biden does stutter and he doesn't even stutter most of the time. I don't stutter. It's in our Goddard, the stutter. When we say something, we have no fork tongue. We say it in 2011. You could catch us saying the same thing in 2021. Yeah, people who glorifying all kind of this book and that book. And all of a sudden, when they see my father book selling used for $197, they're talking about how they go and dig. Keep digging, brother. Keep digging. I dig. So, all with all the isms, and all the chips on all the shoulder, because all they can recognize a true lion, and give honor to a true patriot, and give respect to his son who stay in this struggle, and choose his degree and career around our culture, and represented it to the highest ideals, then all they continue to do all they're doing. Because at the end of the day, there are plenty useful idiots. But there's a few wise ones infiltrated into the quote-unquote steel band movement with an agenda to completely erase from the memory all blackness and anything else to do with struggle and the voice of the oppressed. This is why they will talk about Ministry of Pan and not trade union, because unions represent the lumpen proletarian, the masses. They, all the doctorate holders, see themselves as being among an elite group of intellectuals that must do all of the thinking and decision making for this thinkless masses of pan players that can't make any decisions for themselves. And I beg to differ. And this is why I started with town hall meeting as an information gathering. When I gathered the information, just like any serious study would do, I made some recommendations and I presented them in the form of a report. So I will close with that. I think I went, I just again, I appreciate the time to those who took the time to listen to what I had to say. There's a lot more that's going to come on over the next weeks and years, because I ain't going no way. Them go before me. And one thing I'll show, even if I go before them, just like my old man, I'm not afraid of death.
So I went into the Prime Minister's office and I gave it to her. And then I walked around the savannah. One man protest, all the time I watching the grandstand. I gave the president a copy. He read it. I went round to the minister's office, Arts and Multiculturalism. I gave him a copy. And then I ended up by the NCC chairperson. And I gave her a copy. About 5 days after, I received a call from Pantry Bigo because apparently all the politicians read the copy and they gave it to Pantry Bigo. And the person called, anonymous, no name, and they threatened my life.